I was talking with an older acquaintance, and during the conversation, the topic of climate change came up. I was expressing my concern over climate change and some of the horrifying potential effects, like a thermohaline cycle shutdown. Their response was that the data was still inconclusive, and there was just one scientist making the claim, and he was hiding his data like some sort of nerdy, underfunded Illuminati. At this point in the conversation, I was already pretty frustrated, so I'd asked him if he heard of Sci-Hub. When he said he hadn't, I explained what it was and that all of the research by thousands of scientists was available for anyone to peruse, essentially rendering his argument invalid. But this is a recurring comment I'll hear both online and in person whenever climate change is brought up. There's no real consensus, or not all scientists agree, have become increasingly common phrases as people become more and more proud of the misinformation they've accumulated and convince themselves is the truth. So I figured it was time to look at some of the papers and see what the actual literature has to say so we can dispel this frustrating nonsense once and for all. Today we'll be looking at a short paper called Consensus on Consensus, a synthesis of consensus estimates on human-caused global warming. Basically what that means is that 14 other studies have been conducted to determine how many scientists actually agree that A, climate change is real, and more importantly, B, that humans are the cause. In this paper, they looked at those 14 studies to see how similar their conclusions are, so they can determine what the actual consensus is. Between all of those studies, thousands of papers were analyzed, and thousands of the top scientists in the field and scientists of a variety of backgrounds were surveyed. So it stands to reason that if agreement between all of that comes back positive, it would be safe to say that there is a legitimate consensus and that everyone who actually knows what they're talking about agrees. To spoil the ending, yes, everyone agrees, and frankly, it's frustrating that this paper even needed to be written. As always, I've linked to the paper in the description, and you're more than welcome to and encouraged to read it yourself. As papers go, this is sort of a weird format because of what they're trying to do and the content it's covering. If I had to name it, I would probably call it a review paper, though it's also written to specifically address a claim by another group of scientists, so it's not quite a true review paper. I guess synthesis is technically the best word for it. Be that as it may, what does it actually say? I won't be diving into the same level of detail as the last Journal Club video because of the weird format and because I want you to go read the paper yourself, but here are the important parts. Of all the papers they analyzed, there was a couple different methods used to gauge the consensus of the scientific community. One study surveyed the content of many previous studies, several conducted surveys on members of the relevant scientific community, another compiled public statements by scientists, and the last actually used a mathematical model to analyze citation patterns of the papers in the field. The first of these studies looked at papers that had the phrase global climate change in the title, and of the 928 papers surveyed, 100% of them agree with the position that humans are causing climate change. The next study used a similar methodology and surveyed 11,944 papers, of which 4,014 took a position on humans as the cause of climate change. Of those papers that took a position, 97% agreed that humans caused climate change. The study was based on the abstracts of the papers, though, so the scientists reached out to the original authors of those papers to ask them to self-rate their papers based on the full content of the studies. 1,381 authors replied, and of that group, again, 97% agreed. So already, that's a minimum of almost 5,000 papers by thousands of authors that all agree with anthropogenic climate change. Probably the most interesting approach is the mathematical model of citations. While this method doesn't give an exact number for the consensus, it allows for binary options. Either the results support the idea that there is a consensus, or it rejects the idea. When the data was analyzed, the results were as you might expect. To quote them directly, our results reject the claim of inconclusive science on climate change and identify the emergence of consensus earlier than previously thought. The rest of this review paper mostly explores the other variations of all the earlier stated methods and looked at the surveys of various groups, but I think you all get the point. There is a clear consensus. One interesting note is when they looked at the experience and knowledge in the field versus the consensus agreement percentage. What they found was that the most experienced groups, usually made up of people with a PhD and who've published upwards of 20 papers in the field of climate science, have the highest levels of agreement, around 97% or higher. However, when they surveyed less experienced groups, like earth scientists in general or the general public, the number goes down. To me at least, this seems like the same sort of trend we see in public. The people most sure that climate change is fake are the least familiar with the actual science behind anthropogenic climate change. Just for fun, I went through and counted how many papers this study actually represents, and how many scientists it represents. In the end, it came out to approximately 14,253 papers and 7,214 scientists just in the surveys, not counting the authors of all of those papers. If you then count all of the authors of all of those papers, assuming that each paper has anywhere from 3 to 12 authors, that's about 80,000 scientists represented. Now, I realize this video won't be enough to convince everyone, so in the future we'll be revisiting this topic, and we'll delve into some of the more technical papers that make more specific predictions about climate change. But this video hopefully serves to at least dispel the idea that there isn't consensus between scientists who actually know what they're talking about. If you've got suggestions for papers you want us to explore in future Journal Club episodes, be sure to leave them in the comments. The idea for this video actually came from the comments on the last Journal Club video. And with that, I'll wrap up this video. If you enjoyed and want to see more, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon. I post new videos every Monday, so be sure to check back to see the latest episodes. As always, a big thank you to my patrons who help make these videos possible. That's all for now, and I'll see you next time.